Innovation by Design. This is the slideshow presentation for week 2. And let's just go right into it. So, last week we took a look at the design thinking process for the first time. This is something that is widely used by corporations, by individuals. But last week we focused on the empathize component. This is where we identified a potential problem and went out and began to test whether or not that problem actually existed by interviewing real people who potentially have that problem. The next step, and what we'll focus on this week, is define and ideate. But first of all, we're going to talk about define. So define, there's this Greek term that is logomachy. What logomachy means is it is the arguing over terms. So often human interactions, human arguments, it is arguing over terms. The better you become at noticing this, the better you're able to make those types of observations. So why do we have to have all of our terms defined? So that they are testable and measurable. Okay, the idea here is that unless we have our terms defined specifically and clearly, we are not able to do diligent science. So in order to do good science, we have to all be in agreement on the terms. So imagine a scientist drafts a hypothesis, which a problem statement is very much a hypothesis, but a scientist drafts a hypothesis and now they go and they test that hypothesis. In order to be able to do that, they have to have a clear understanding of every term within that hypothesis. Okay? So define. What we're going to narrow in on now this week from, again, the empathize component is now what is the real problem? What is the actual phenomena of the problem that users are dealing with? And then also, just as important, who are the users? Okay. When it is that you went out and interviewed this past week, think about it. If you had someone who they're like, oh yeah, that's a problem for me, or yeah, kind of, I think about it sometimes, then that's probably not necessarily a problem worth solving. Once you have started talking about a problem that someone, now they can't shut up about, they're like, oh my God, every day I wake up and I have that problem, or every time I go to do this, I have that problem. You have a solution for that problem? I would pay you top dollar today if you had a solution for that problem. So these are the kinds of things you want to hear. And that's how you know you're solving a problem worth solving. Okay? But again, this is about defining. So suppose that we did identify a problem. How can we now properly frame that problem so that it is both testable and measurable? Okay? So a little bit here on the idea of we're going towards problem statement. So a problem statement, we want to be human-centered. So very much like it should be like a, just very much connected to the real feedback that you got from real people, potentially phraseology you might end up using from the data that you collected from the real people. In the beginning of any kind of science, but of any kind of a business venture, this feedback that we collect at the beginning is this qualitative feedback, this qualitative data, which is going to help us to be able to optimize our solution, define our problem, and then ultimately optimize our solution. But in order to be able to get there, we have to be able to be willing to be human-centered and focus on truly, with an unbiased approach, getting feedback from real people. Okay. We also have to be broad for creativity. So the idea here being is that if we become, it's like a kind of a double-edged sword, because on one level we need to be very much niche, and in many ways the more niche the better. But if we become too stringent, then we hold ourselves back from being creative. So the idea is being flexible. Okay, being willing to adapt, being willing to rephrase the problem, being willing to adjust. The number one reason a startup fails is not enough customers, and the idea is that if you leave out the real people from the very beginning or ignore what it is that they're saying from the very beginning, then that's no good. Okay, any brittle business models that are very much like this is how it's going to be, this is how we're going to do it, they break on impact with real people, because real people behave very, very differently than in the real world than when we write about them on a whiteboard. Okay. But then also narrow for manageability. So the idea being is that if it is, we want to serve maybe like a few million people and not hope to serve like hundreds of millions of people. So the reason for why I say that is imagine when you go and you like have a billboard, okay? And who are you marketing to with a billboard? Anyone who happens to drive past the billboard, right? So the idea here is that you're going to have a lot of people who just ignore it, right? We want to find those people who are most likely to convert, the people who are most likely to be like, oh my God, that's a problem that I have, and I'll pay you top dollar for it today, kind of thing, okay? The last word here kind of being a balance between focus and feasibility. Very much a big part of this course is going to be about taking these ideas and testing for feasibility. Is this a feasible thing to bring about? Okay. All right, so problem statement canvas. So the idea here is one of the assignments that we're going to do this week is assignment number 3, define, which is going to be this is going to include this. So within this is the idea of how to frame a problem statement. So notice what happens here. Okay. When does the problem occur? Now it's a little, you would think maybe you read it this way, but you actually read it this way. So bam, bam, bam. When does the problem occur? Who has the problem most often? What is the root cause of the problem? How does the customer feel? What is the measurable impact? What do customers do now to face the problem, which is very, very important. And then also, what are the disadvantages of the solution? So you shouldn't just be like, oh, this is a problem. You also have to know what is it that people currently are doing to solve that problem. This way, these are ultimately, in many ways, these are your competitors, right? Even if it's not something that they're necessarily paying for, why would they pay you rather than use the existing solution that is already kind of fixing the problem or partially fixing the problem or minimizing the problem? Okay. So you read it like this, and then notice what happens on the next slide. So create a problem statement related to your user's problems. This is a pretty quick slideshow. The idea here is when context occurs, customers who have characteristic have problem. Because of this, they feel emotional impact, then experience quantifiable impact. Currently, they use these alternatives despite alternative shortcomings. So the idea of this really nice, using it this way, is this. Notice context, and then when context occurs, that's just right here. When does this problem occur? When the user does this. Right? Customers. So who has the problem most often? And then customers. And then also characteristic of the of the customer. So characteristic. Root cause of the problem. Have problems. So right here is where you put the root cause. Emotional impact and quantifiable impact. Notice emotional impact and experience quantifiable impact. Alternatives. Currently they use blank alternatives despite alternative shortcomings. So you can see how these two things are connected. This problem statement canvas and this problem statement template. Okay, so use those two hand in hand to be able to do the assignment this week. Okay, okay, and then the best problem statements contain 3 elements: target audience, that's the customers; root cause of the problem right here; and then the unique insight from the entrepreneur, which is typically found like currently they use this despite this, right? Another one that we use as an example a lot is like high school students are not prepared for college. This is not because of a lack of intelligence, but instead it is because of a lack of access to resources. Okay, so the conventional wisdom would maybe be that it is a lack of intelligence, but your unique insight as the entrepreneur is that it is not because of a lack of intelligence, it's rather because of a lack of access to resources, which you can start to see how it doesn't tell you exactly what the solution is, but it kind of screams that the solution is going to be something to do with connecting high school students with the resources they need to be successful. Okay. Yeah, the next thing in here is this. So we'll be going into ideation. And you can see here the defining the problem and worst possible idea. So read these two readings as well. So this video and those 2 readings before doing the assignments is definitely the way to go. Okay. As always, if you have any questions whatsoever, reach out. I am here and happy to help. Okay. Best, Justin.